Good evening to all of you who have joined us from all parts of Europe. Welcome to the opening night of TRANSPOESIE. We have just been listening to the piano music of Kazimir Liberski, and we'll hear more of the music at the end of the evening. TRANSPOESIE is the poetry festival in the capital of Europe that UNIC Brussels has organized now for the 10th time. UNIC is the Association of European Union National Institutes for Culture, and one of them is the Hungarian Institute, which is hosting this opening event. This means we have a small live audience here in the venue, and from here we reach out to you all wherever you are in Europe. The event of tonight is set up in collaboration with many partners, and especially with Versopolis. This is a European poetry platform supported by Europe's Creative Europe program. And the platform is set up by the wonderful Slovenian poet and publisher Aleš Steger and creates new opportunities for emerging European poets, focusing on coaching, translation, and mobility. Next to me is the UNIC president, Jitka Jurkova. Hello, Jitka Jurkova. She will tell us a bit more about TRANSPOESIE. So this is the 10th edition. What are the core elements of TRANSPOESIE?
TRANSPOESIE started 10 years ago. There's a very modest attempt to celebrate the diversity of European languages. It started on the Day of European Languages, which is every year on the 26th of September. And well, here, especially in Brussels, the city of such a beautiful linguistic diversity, UNIC Brussels felt like we should also contribute to honoring this really crucial element of our literary experience, I would say. Now, 10 years after, it is, I would say, the most praised and maybe our favorite project, the favorite project of UNIC Brussels, not only because it brings us joy every year and it brings us really the amazing richness of European languages and European contemporary poetry, but also because it's really beloved by the audiences. So this year, despite the difficult circumstances, we were, well, trying to think really hard how to still have this project in action and how we can bring it to everyone. And well, it's a bold attempt at a hybrid project combining both physical audiences, good evening to you, and virtual audiences all around the world. The core elements have always been live readings of poetry, very important personal experience, face-to-face experience, life experience with the European poets, but also bringing contemporary European poetry to public space, which we love. We are every year putting up poets in translations all around Brussels on subway and actually sometimes also in subway stations, so people can read it also on their daily journey to work. And sometimes we added for fun more elements such as the flash mob that you saw in the introduction video last year. This year was a challenge, but it's also, of course, as always, an opportunity, and that's why we are not only having our dear poets online for a discussion with the audiences, but we also could add through this virtual platform some multimedia elements.
How great! Thank you so much. Yes, so for the people living in Brussels, just look very carefully if you take the subway in the coming 2 weeks, because you will meet poetry in all kinds of languages translated into French and to English. And well, for the ones not living in Brussels, you're lucky this time because of this sanitary crisis, we have done all the efforts, or UNIC has done all the efforts to make all the writers invited here available all over Europe now via the live streaming. So thank you so much. And I wanted to say that for this TRANSPOESIE project of this year, not less than 26 countries are participating. And in the coming weeks, TRANSPOESIE will present 4 more online events, each time on Wednesday. You can check them on the TRANSPOESIE website. And for tonight, we don't have 26, but we have 6 poets. And moreover, there are 6 female poets, female voices who share their poetic journeys with us. What can you expect? Presentations and readings recorded during summer at the homes of the poets in preparation of this event. They are mostly in English, sometimes in French, together with live conversations we will have because the 6 poets are with us from their rooms in their countries. Please welcome Denisa Comanescu from Romania, Marlena Breister from Israel, Kasia Goreckan from Slovenia, Giedre Kazlauskaite from Lithuania, Zigos Björk Preisdorttir from Iceland, and Caroline Simon from Luxembourg. And I propose we first have a look at what Caroline Simon from Luxembourg has prepared for us.
Hi, I'm Caroline Simon and I am representing Luxembourg for the 2020 TRANSPOESIE Festival. I'm 23 years old and I'm a student in fine arts in Canada, and I've been writing poetry since my teenage years. So for this little presentation, I figured since we cannot meet physically and we won't be able to share those precious and poetic moments and interactions, I created a little video, a so-called poetic walk. So I hope you will enjoy it, and I wish everyone to stay safe wherever you are. La nuit courra après toi. Dans les taches néon blanc, les lampadaires marqueront ton passage d'un clin d'œil. Je cacherai des cris dans le ventre, elle te poursuivra dans l'éphémère. Fuite se ramifie en courage. Les essoufflements feignent une vie en taille, mais suis immobile. Me souviens plus de ton adresse et engendrer un nouveau tour de dune. La mer pleure ta salive dans mes bras et je lui dis de se taire demain.
Soubresaut. Souvent, et même 2 déboutonnements par bouchée, on renifle l'impression d'avoir oublié l'ordre de l'itinéraire. On aurait marché plus vite, sans acouphènes, mais escalier n'attend pas. Que penses-tu là, maintenant ? S'agite la banderole. Et elle se demande s'il ne faut pas laisser péricliter l'adresse ou boucher les trous du verre. On est arrivé 2 soubresauts en retard, mais l'excuse s'explique rarement, elle se défait. Elle sent le continu idoine qui s'écrase. Alors, on se trémousse en serpentant verticalement parce que excuse ne s'articule pas et qu'on sait, oui, que globe oculaire fixe la manigance. Crédibilité halète. Minutes s'arrachent à la peau et ça finit par hochement de tête insipide. Sur le passage, de travers, on s'enfuit sur gauche salvatrice. Fallait rester là-bas. Beaucoup de vent. Ça s'envolait par scission crépusculaire et des bras aussi, fixés sur bonhomie. L'imprévu reste anonyme dans l'attente du prochain train. La nuit. La nuit corrige la souplesse d'un regard. Elle en appelle aux mégardes improvisés. En joignant des lèvres, elle remémore l'autrefois, les empreintes. Des corps se baladent près des serrures de portes, ils esquivent leur absence. Raccompagné, l'effluve maintient par son contact l'exquise négociation des corps. Intact, intact. Mais le long des quais, les intensités délaissent les fixations caractérielles. Ils ne seront jamais que l'antiprojection de ton imagination. Fragilise-les dans les mots. Relever la peau des autres. Vérifier qu'ils soignent toujours leur silence. même loin des sidérations contemplatives, les ondes divergent. Ne cessez pas de sentir votre présence bouillir au bout des doigts. Il y a des atrophies qui s'autorégulent la nuit, quand la menace des plafonds blancs s'aventure dans bifurcations incessantes. Les corps se maintiennent dans une profondeur de répit. Si jamais la nuit nous observe, qu'elle ne s'incruste pas dans la dualité. La marche qui déraille vous informe que les prototypes de poètes, oui, les prototypes de poètes, sont sortis hier, dans la rue, pour scarifier leur gorge d'odes aux craintifs, sans reprendre leur haleine. Ils mangent comme des lâches, épais comme des héros. La marche qui déraille vous informe que les baleines tombent en apnée pour se reposer. Cessez de forer. Jamais louvoyer, juste prévenir que bientôt, -20, ils vendront des kits de suicide. Ces perturbateurs platoniques, leur obstination flagelle la concentration des très grands, très appliqués chasseurs de pauvres. Il suffit de traverser la rue pour trouver un travail. Les camisoles de faim s'apprêtent à défiler. La marche qui déraille vous informe de la dégénérescence de l'art sanguin, de la tolérance mâchouillée, du sans-appui, des vidéograttages interceptés sans votre accord. La marche est un mythe identitaire qui s'épuise. Est-ce l'anarchie des frangins de fracture? Observe ces têtes qui débordent, celles qui transitent. Elles oublient qu'à l'aube cimentée, le Yémen console ses morts dans l'ombre fraternelle. Les prototypes de poètes remanient les portes de secours. La marche qui déraille n'informe plus. Elle s'écrie « Je tiens l'impossible dans la cacophonie ».
Thank you so much, Caroline Simon. Merci beaucoup, Caroline Simon, pour cette magnifique contribution for this kick-off of the event. And I propose we immediately continue, before we start conversations, to look what Katja Gorecka from Slovenia has prepared for us.
So my name is Katja Gorecka and I come from a very small village called Dramlje from Slovenia. So I finished my studies in comparative literature and literature theory, and then I finished dramaturgy in Academy for Theatre, and now I'm currently working in a production for contemporary performance. So my first book, The Sorrows of Young Hannah, is talking about more like an anxiety of being a young female poet who is trying to find her voice, like very cliche, to find a voice, to find your voice. And it's talking like in, not in first person, because when I was reading Elfriede Jelinek book, The Lovers, I found out it's better also for me as a writer to find a distance and also to imagine one character that I could write like my statements through. So I invented Hannah. Hannah is also a character in one very famous Slovenian drama by Slavko Grum, and she's one of the characters. She was raped when she was younger, and she's the only person who escaped her normal life in a very small city. So she's like the only person who survived. So I got Hannah name from that drama. And I was influenced by Elfriede Jelinek in the style of writing. I never wanted to become Elfriede, but I felt very safe in that kind of writing, like writing through distance to your character. So I wrote The Sorrows of Young Hannah, I think 10 years ago, something like that, when I was 21 and still a student of comparative literature. Yeah, okay. So in my writings, I was also influenced by a lot of playwriters, not only poetry. So my texts are like always mix of like hybrid poetry, prose, and also drama, like monologues. So also the next poetry book, this career poem, is talking about 7 women. And also I'm using voices from 7 women. And it's actually, it talks about giving birth to a dead baby, to a stillborn. And I'm using also one story from my grandma, how she lost like most of her family, men from her family, and like different kind of things, mostly with violence and loneliness. Hana in svet. V trenutku, ko Hana stopi iz hiše, ji gre na jok in postane ji neizmerno slabo. Hana ve, da to ne more biti jutranja nosečniška slabost, saj ni seksala že 2 leti, odkar se je odločila za post. Hana ve, da sem se ravnokar zlagala, saj mi nismo njeni starši in nismo njena babica, niti dedek, da jo bomo obsojili, če nam bo povedala, da je nazadnje seksala včeraj. In ko se je zjutraj zbudila, ni vedela, kdo zraven nje leži. Ampak zaradi lepšega bralčevega občutka bom raje napisala, da je Hana seksala 2 leti nazaj, oziroma morda še bolje, da je devica in namerava samostan, kakor so si njeni starši od nekdaj želeli. Torej, Hana ne mara sveta. Rada seksa z neznanci, ker neznanci ne bolijo. Čeprav je med pisanjem ravnokar ugotovila, da si želi bolečino, saj bolečina vodi v nekaj lepega in kar je lepo, ne more biti slabo za življenje. Sovraži dneve, ko se zbudi brez cigaret, ker potem mora zjutraj takoj v trgovino, namesto da bi najprej spila kavo in šele nato opravila borbo z vsemi ostalimi ljudmi. Ti ostali ljudje znajo biti naporni, saj si Hana velikokrat poje med hojo, še raje pa se sama s sabo pogovarja. Ljudje jo gledajo čudno, saj se sami s sabo pogovarjajo samo še norci, narkomani in brezdomci. Ali morda osamljeni moški, za katere misliš, da se pogovarjajo sami s sabo, v bistvu pa nagovarjajo Hano. Zato je Hana že v osnovi zasovražila današnji dan, ker je včeraj po pomoti pokadila zadnjo cigareto, saj je bila živčna in nohtov ji je zmanjkalo. Trenirki je počasi stopicala proti trgovini, ki je 10 metrov stran od njenega stanovanja. V nervozi, da bi morda srečala soseda, s katerim je seksala 3 mesece nazaj in jo je zelo prizadel. Ampak zakaj bi krivila njega? Raje krivi sebe, ker je to najlažje. 3 mesece in nobenega odgovora od njega. Le kako naša Hana še preživi takšno stisko v sebi? Postala je verižna kadilka. Ampak kljub temu, da strastjo hrani raka v sebi, ga še vedno pogreša, čeprav nam bo to zanikala, ker jo preprosto preveč zaboli vsakič, ko se spomni nanj. In noče postati patetična, kajti emocionalne pesnice pa nihče noče, ne potrebuje in ne ljubi. Hana in poezija ali Hani se ne da več. Kar se tiče poezije, bi Hana najraje ostala tiho, vendar ne morem. Svoje pesmi je začela skrivati in pokopavati v zemljo, da jih bodo nekoč morda odkrili. Kar se tiče naše poezije, bi Hana najraje zakričala: kar ljubiš, se ti v naši deželi zagnusi. Hana ne bo nikoli povedala, kar si misli, ker potem je njena pesniška pot končana. Hana si misli, ampak Hana ne bo priznala. Hana hoče brati svoje pesmi, Hana hoče izdati kakšno knjigo, ampak Hani ne bo nikoli uspelo, ker Hana ni tipičen primer pesnice. Kakšen je tipičen primer, Hana ne ve, ampak ve, da to ni ona. In najpomembneje, Hana nima vez. Hani je tega dovolj. Ne daj se je več boriti s pesniki. Zakaj bi se le morala boriti za svojo poezijo? Hana rada opazuje samo vklicane pesniške zveze, ki so narejene po istem kopitu. Vsako leto izdajo pesniško zbirko, vsako leto imajo na tisoče nastopov, na katerih modrujejo in hlinijo ljubezen. Vsako leto dobijo isti nagrado ali morda vmes mine kakšno leto. Vse povsod vidi iste obraze, ki dajo vedeti, kaj pa ti, ženski otrok, delaš tukaj, nisi dobrodošla. To smo samo mi, vrh Parnasa, ki traja in dokler ne umremo, ti nimaš za burek, ali kako je civilizacija izgubila vero. Potem se ga napijajo in postanejo agresivni in udari moška moč, katere Hana nikoli ne bo imela, zato lahko kar izgine, odkuder je prišla. Razmišljala je, da bi pokleknila prednje in jih prosila, prosim, preberite moje pesmi, niso za nič, zares ne. Ampak je danes še preveč utrujena in premalo močna. Nekoč boš imela dobre pesmi, ampak nikoli tako dobre, kot so moje. Hana ne bo nehala pisati, ampak bo preprosto postala apatična za vse izpade in udarce. Ravno to hočemo, zato vedno najraje udarim tja, kjer najbolj boli. In ravno tu Hana loči pesnike na dva razreda. Pesniki, ki ostanejo ljudje, in pesniki, ki postanejo zveri.
So, thank you so much, Katja. We have been listening now to the two youngest poets of the six, and we'll come back to them later. And before we start a conversation with the six of us, we're going first to present to you a poet from Iceland, and her name is Sigurbjörg Þrastardóttir. And Sigurbjörg, I would like to ask you first to explain us your name.
Yes, sure. Hi, Sigrid. Hi, everyone. Yes, it's always rather a mess when I'm being presented because it looks a bit long, but it's Sigurbjörg is two words really. Sigur means victory, and Björg means savior. And then the latter part is my father's Christian name, and then Dóttir means daughter. So it's a system. So it's not really that complicated when you depict it, kind of, if you decode it.
Okay, yes. So, but you're not only writing poetry, you're also a writer of prose and even plays and song lyrics. So I wanted to know, how do you divide the time between these different disciplines, and what is the place of poetry in your life?
Oh yes, time divides itself. I think poetry is the core of everything I do, but then something else pops up, I don't know, somewhere in side spaces in my head, and then I turn to that, but the poetry is the basis, I think. So I would think even maybe my prose is somewhat lyrical, so it seeps through the other genres, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I propose we are going to listen to some of your poetry.
All right, sure.
And we look forward to that.
Halda hópinn spari. Ég get ekki að þessu gert, þið eruð ágætir kokkar, en eftir kvöldverðinn, yfir áramótaskaupinu, munnholið mitt stútfullt af sveppum, káli, brúnni sósu, malti, gúrkum og rauðum smartís. Þess vegna hlæ ég ekki upphátt, hristi bara höfuðið hægt og belgi annars innfallnar kinnarnar. Ég meina ekkert illt, en ekki horfa. Því nú byrjar sultan að leka og kannski fljúga út úr mér fuglar úr skemmtiatriði bráðum. Teppaland Berlín. Nýja borgin þar sem fallegustu konurnar hræra í köldu pasta undir gluggum sporvagna og hinar gleyma að lita sér varirnar. Borgin þar sem Indverjarnir eru ekki Indverjar, en sumir farþegar minna á gleymdar barnastjörnur, til dæmis Mickey Rooney, og flugbrautirnar eru vaktaðar af skátum. Eða þar sem torgin eru grafin sundur í leit að beinum og sveittar konur kalla fagnandi í dyragætt Willkommen Sigisburg, eins og maður væri austurískt fjallaþorp. Kókaín. Veturinn sígur langar línur af lausamjöll í nösina. Morðsaga. Haustið hætti við að fara, kom aftur jólin. Ég setti skóinn út í glugga og fékk píanó. En líka þetta laufblað af björk. Setti það í þykka bók sem ég hafði aldrei lesið. Sé fyrst núna hvað það kunnulegt. Það hefur sama lag og hálsindin innanverður. Ég gæti gert eitt. Ég gæti lagt það varlega í kokið á þér. Þannig getur þið hætt að anda, fyrirhafnalaust. Íslenskt laufblað, næfur þund, fallegasti dauðdaginn, finnst þér ekki? Páskagæska. Agnarsmáu kanínupipakökurnar voru bleikar á skrokkinn, grænar á skrokkinn, bláar til eyrnanna, gular á snoppu, klestar, rauðar, flaskaðar í framan, náfölar, sykurlausar, vanskapaðar og málstóla. Barnið skríkti og neitaði að borða þær, braut þær og mölvaði og skríkti og hjó. Þroskalýsi. Einu sinni, þegar Elísabet Englandsdrottning var 22 ára, stóð hún snöggt upp á baðkari og teygði hendurnar svo hátt til himins í einhverju bjartsýniskasti og hún fékk sárt tak í síðuna. Hún smeygðist stillilega í mjúkar teyjubuxur sem einhver hafði smyglað inn til hennar og lá fyrir það sem eftir lifði þess dags. Orgían bugar öllu burt. Fyrra bréf okkar til kóryndumanna ritað með trönuberjavodka við höndina í nýlegu hjólhýsi þar sem 2 okkar dotta, 3 okkar hneppastreng. Kæru kóryndumenn, varðandi móðuröðlið sem alltaf gert ráð fyrir að sé svo sterkt að hermdi að yfir flest annað skyggi höfum við eftirfarandi athugasemd sem við færum hér í fáein orð en getum auðveldlega skýrt í nýju bréfi sé eftir því sóst. Aðeins hér erum vér eins og fiskar í vatni.
Thank you so much, Sigurbjörg. So we have been listening now already to 3 poets, 3 languages as well. And the 3 of them all work with in interaction with other disciplines. And I was wondering why go from the courting of language to other forms of expression? So this question I would like first to ask Sigurbjörg, who works with musicians, visual artists, who currently work on a music collaboration around climate. So please tell us a bit more about it.
Yes, it's. I think it's nice to break the isolation of the room. Look, we're all in our different rooms, very much by ourselves. So it's very nice to do a bit of collaboration from time to time. And I think for me, it gives something like extra power to to the words, even if you collaborate with musicians or photographers. And it's also can be inspiring because it gives you different guidelines or a different frame to work by. So it expands, because sometimes you're just doing your own thing, and then someone comes with a melody or someone comes with a project, and you have to sort of open up and get involved with more things than your own. This piece you mentioned about climate angst has already been premiered. It was a collaboration with a young composer. Her name is Ingibjörg, here in Iceland, Skarphéðinsdóttir. And it was performed by a string quartet and a mezzo-soprano singer. But she didn't really sing. It was more like spoken. Well, it was fantastic music and really an angry piece, a powerful piece.
Thank
you. Yes.
Thank you so much. The thing of isolation is also what I heard from Katja from Slovenia. She was also mentioning the relation between isolation as a writer and interaction with other artists. How does it work for you, Katja?
Yes, because I studied also dramaturgy, and I worked in theaters a lot, so that means I'm very happy to work with other people. And also for me, like I like to be isolated for now and then, but I need to be connected with people most of the time. And most of the time is people that are not I'm surrounded with the people that don't have anything to do with poetry. But because I'm a theater person, I like collaborations also mostly in theaters and also in contemporary dance.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Caroline, you are even an artist yourself because you're doing art studies.
Yes, well, artist, I don't know, but I'm a student, yes. And what I really like is, I think for me personally, poetry is like a starting point. It's an inspiration, and at the same time, it's a medium within the medium. So I like to introduce it in a painting with a word, but I think it's not like Basquiat, Jean-Michel Basquiat. It's not that expressive, but it's like the rest of the painting is translated visually, and I believe words have limits. So painting and drawing is there to overcome and sublimate what cannot be translated with words. And I think it's also interesting to see that some poets use collage, where they use more visual elements mixed with words. And I think it's also a way to touch a larger public, maybe a public that doesn't necessarily read poetry. And yes, it's a different kind of medium to touch people.
Okay, thank you. Now, another way to get out of the isolation of the working room can also be activism and go outside to relate to society and what's happening in the world. And there I would like to ask Giedre from Lithuania. We didn't hear her yet, but we will listen to her poetry later. If poetry, in your view, can be political and can have an activist role?
Well, thank you for question. I believe that poetry should be political. Not every, but my poetry, I believe that it is political, and we live in Vilnius, and now there are many events in Belarus, and we see violence, blood, and we are very we're in fear, and I have some Belarusian poets on Facebook, and I see that we are writing poems just now about what is going now, and that's political poetry, and I love it. And I have some friends from Ukraine, and we also writing something about war, and I believe in Miller's sentence he said. Poetry must be like Messiah. It's maybe very pathetically, but poetry leads, and poetry can do some strange things. For example, Soviet Union was break out, and maybe some poets were writing about it before that break.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. I would like to know from Denisa Comenescu, who was raised in Romania in communist times, what is her view on poetry as activism, having lived and worked in under dictatorship? You have to put on your mic. We cannot hear you, Denisa, now. You have to put on your mic.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Hello. Well, it would have been quite difficult to be an activist during the communist times. I belong to a generation called the 80s generation of poets and writers who had almost nothing to do with the politics of the party or what was happening at that time. Why? Because the dictatorship was so much established. They didn't need us, the younger poets at the time, and we knew it, and at the same time we despised them, the communists, and so we didn't want to interfere. Therefore, there are two rivers going parallel. Of course, it implied censorship, publishing poetry later, no possibility to travel abroad, etc., etc. But okay, it's a kind of resistance, not a kind of activism. That's the difference.
Thank you for this nuance, very important. But indeed, we are living in times now where I can imagine also the younger generations say, like, as poets, we have to raise our voice and consider again the big topics of our time, because there's a kind of urgency now. And maybe we can continue talking about this later, but I propose we first listen to Giedrė Kazlauskaitė, living in Lithuania. She already took the words. Giedrė, you told me that for you, the poetry of the Baltic countries is very important to you, this whole language area, and the influences are important to you. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Well, I really love neighbors poetry, neighbors that Polish, Latvian, Estonian, Russian, Belarusian. I'm really interested in that area because we have similar experience, similar political experience and psychological experience maybe. And I love that area because it's Eastern Europe, and we lived in Soviet Union. We had some traumas, and it's very interesting to see that we have similar things, similar metaphors, and that the language of Aesopus, that's called, I I can't find it, for example, I can't find it in Italian poetry or in French poetry. It's interesting for me, and I know a little bit that languages, Russian, some Polish, and I can understand Belarusian, some Ukrainian, and it's interesting because we have many in common.
Okay, thank you. Let's listen to your poetry.
Dar nebuvau skaičius Lakano, o jau žinojau, kad moters nėra. Vyrai buvo priaiškę. Troleibusuose bijodavau greta jų atsisėsti, arijų žvilgsniais, pasitikinčių savimi, išsiskėtusių per pusantro krėslo. O aš gerai atsimenu, ką man kalbėjo Vislava, turėjusi tapti balerina, bet troškusi būti dailininkė. Keistomis kalbomis mes kalbėjomės, su Piterio akcentu, į jai studijo išdžiūvusios choreografijas, kurių taip neapkenčiau, mokytojos žilomis galvomis, juodais kaspinais. Pasiramščiuodamos lasdomis jos ateidavo į valgyklą pasverti varškės, kad Vislava, kai išvėmė kartoninę Napoleono dėžutę, liautųsi piešusi porcijas. Ak, kaip siaubingai išdavė visą tai, ką tadaise kalbėjo, vien tam, kad galėtų viena šlaunimi prisiglausti tos pusės krėslo troleibuse. O aš atsimenu, ką man kalbėjo kita Vislava, parašiusi apie Heraklito upę, kur žuvis ketvirčiuoja žuvį, jau daug vėliau, ta pačia kalba, beveik pamiršta, išnyrančia iš vaikystės lyg mitas apie mūsų tebeišvėmiamą egzistavimą. Ji nemelavo, kad mėgsta sentimentalius atvirukus pauksuotus blizgučiais, saldžias it deserto varškė porcelianinės skulptūrėles, kryželių siuvinėtas gulbės. Jų nuolat ieškojo kičio parduotuvėlėse, svėrė lyg porcijas. Ir kiek daug jų galėjo pirkti po Nobelio, o jos žodžiai buvo laivai, kuriais paslapčia išplukdydavau visą Iliados vyryje, išplukdžiau nesušokamus savo instinktus, užmūrijau garsą. Prie upės pavasarį taip paukščiai šaukia vieni kitus. Aurora. Aurora buvo herojų laivas, kol pasakoje gyvenom. Kvepiantis testosteronų berniukai jie mėgdavo piešti, nors niekad nematė, kai po parado iššaudavo tuščiais šoviniais, bėgdavo rinkti gilzių tarp kareiviškų antkapių. Rožiapirštė sparnuota deivė, šafrano spalvos drabužiais, iš auksinių indų laistanti rasą. Mokykloje tikėjome kilnumu to šūvio pradėjusio revoliuciją. Vėliau nebeliko lapšių ir žmonės sūpuoklėse supo savo mažus vaikus. Ganyti išleisdavo tik jiems suaugus. Kol buvau embrionas, svajodavau apie anapus, neišsivyščiusiomis akimis matydavau vaizdinius rojaus. Tie sapnai apie Dievą, nenupasakojami, verčiantis patikėti jo nelogišku buvimu, net pilvo ertmėj, kur ganėsi jos gyvuliai. Filosofui žmogus rašydavo laiškus, nepritapėliai gyvena po vandeniu, o žodžiai yra silpni per glebių raumenų, naminių mutantų kaulais. Po vandeniu, kreiserių pilvuose, aukso induose vietoj žiedų, sutartinis žegnojimasis ties tavo vartais. Nusidažėme plaukus žilai, kaip toji aktorė iš Valandų, vietoj pliušo arkos užrašiusi tau erškėtrožių krūmą su švelniai geliančiomis kamanėmis. 12 vasarų ganiau savo gyvulius, o tik dabar išgirdau, kaip tigrų balsais susišaukia povai. Amazoniškos bičių moterys, auščiant verdamoms bulvėms, kam vaikų miega po vieną. Moterų bitės nesibijo mirti, nuo cigaretės geliant, nuo ledo šukės, perpjauna veną valant šaldytuvą. Vienuolės bitės mažai kalbasi tarpusavį, kalbėdamos lipdo namus. Moteris baltais chalatais avilių vienuolynuose sprendžia cheminės lygtis, traukia viena kitą iš kolbų, iš ląstelių susideda ir žino, kad iš ląstelių. Jų vaškiniai sparnai indikuojantis nuo slogos išteka pro nosį, veikiant katalizatoriams jos susikelia vakciną, trumpo sujungimo cheminės reakcijas, skiepus ir todėl neįsimyli. XX ląstelių mažiau nei XY, bet stato namus. Literatūrinis nėštumas įvardinau priežastį akademinėms atostogoms pasiimti. Pilvotos moterys bažnyčioje susirinko į embrionų mišias, mano rankose anatomijos atlasas su leisgyviais raumenimis, spazmiškai trūkčiojančiais, kaip prisilieti, kupriniai konservuoti išsigimę kūdikėliai ir žodynas, kur auga lotyniški medžiai. Sėdžiu bažnyčioje tarp pilvų, skaitydama vitražus, laukiu pilvo užaugant.
Thank you so much, Giedre Kaslauskaite, for this very strong poetry. There is one person of the 6 poets we have here tonight that we didn't hear yet. That's Marlena Breister. She's a Romanian poet living in Israel, and we are going to watch now a little presentation that she prepared during summer.
Je suis née à Iași, en Roumanie, et je vis en Israël depuis 1980. J'appartiens donc à 3 espaces culturels, l'espace israélien, l'espace roumain et l'espace français. Le français, je l'ai appris à partir de l'âge de 5 ans, avant d'apprendre à écrire. Et j'ai continué à l'école et j'ai continué avec des études de langue et littérature française à l'université de Haïfa, ensuite à Paris, où j'ai terminé un doctorat en linguistique en 1991. C'était un moment de rupture, malgré le fait que j'avais commencé à enseigner à l'université, mais déjà la poésie commençait à s'imposer et à prendre beaucoup de place, à presque remplacer la linguistique. Et le français devenait déjà la langue de l'expression poétique pour moi. C'est encore une activité que j'aime beaucoup. Je traduis surtout de la poésie, mais je traduis aussi de la prose amosose surtout, de l'hébreu vers le roumain. J'avais traduit dans le temps Benjamin Fondan du roumain en français. Et c'est un travail qui, pour moi, est très sérieux, un travail dur, un travail de linguiste et un travail poétique, une sorte d'écriture, écriture réfractée, écriture au second degré. Dans ma poésie, le désert est au centre depuis des années, ainsi que les villes, toutes les villes de ma vie, les villes où j'ai vécu. Mais ce qui est très important, c'est toujours la langue. La poésie est dans la langue. Donc j'aime beaucoup faire des recherches, disons, archéologiques dans la langue, des jeux de mots qui apparaissent souvent dans ma poésie, dans les titres aussi de mes recueils. Pour résumer, je peux dire que je suis née en Roumanie, mais je n'écris pas en roumain, que je vis en Israël, mais je n'écris pas en hébreu. Je ne vis pas en France, mais j'écris en français. Un poème du recueil Oublié en avant, qui est né comme d'autres recueils aussi dans le désert du Negev, le désert que j'aime beaucoup, où je vais souvent. La voix nous précède, l'écho précède la voix, le visage nous précède, l'ombre précède le visage, la poésie nous précède. Ensablée, plus nous voulons la lire, plus elle s'ensable. Une traînée de sable dans chaque grain, un début de tempête en suspens, officiant l'imminence. La tempête de sable mime des torrents tortueux. Les cratères de sable miment des cratères rocailleux. La rumeur du trouble silence d'après-tempête s'élève dans ma voix. Le désert est né aveugle. Traversant l'image, un son s'est figé, un silence libéré et son écho, pénombre du son. Un son a décomposé l'image, sans voir que je vois. Nous, les pèlerins du désert, les corps tremblants dans leurs contours, nos ombres nous précèdent dans la marche. Dans sa veillée diffuse, il a soif le désert. L'horizon est si proche, l'horizon est partout, l'horizon de la soif. Nous, les pèlerins du désert, l'horizon de la soif nous appelle. Les échos précèdent nos voix séchées. Les ombres se retournent sur elles-mêmes. Écho, chaos, qui se retourne sur lui-même. La lumière se concentre, efface les ombres. Les voix se concentrent, efface les échos. Reste l'écho de la lumière, l'ombre de la voix, immense voyelle, atone, désert. Un poème du dernier recueil publié qui s'appelle De violettes luisantes, toujours chez Jacques Brémond. Les premiers rayons du poème se lèvent au milieu de la nuit, du chaos bien rangé de nos voix sauvages. Tu subis l'éclat noir dans les grottes de chaque syllabe. Il fait encore nuit dans les mots, et des milliers d'yeux rouges guettent. La nuit est longue avant le poème. La voix mène à l'aube noire. Tu sors de la nuit, le poème s'éteint.
Magnifique. Poème, c'est ça. Oui, on a entendu de belles choses déjà. We have heard many, many beautiful work already. And so before we start a longer conversation, we will listen first to the poetry of our last poet, that's Denisa Kolaneshko. We already heard her talk already a bit about the communism context where she was raised. And Denisa, you told before, not on the screen yet, but that when you started to write poetry, your father had an advice for you. What was that advice?
Well, when I was about 10 years old, I changed school, and I had to leave my school desk. And so I wrote my first poem, dedicated an elegy for my school desk, and showed it to my father. And my father told me, well, you want to write verses, but I have an advice, never to write about the party and about the communists. And I kept my word, and never I did it.
How is it now? Because you're in Romania, not only a respected poet, but also a very respected publisher, translator. You have your own Denisa's bookshelf. So how is the literature context and the poetry context now in your country?
I'm proud in a way to say that I feel that young generations, they read a lot. They are very interested in what is happening now in old literature. And of course, poetry is not for everybody. You have to resonate with poetry. And there are many poetry clubs, many for young poets. They have their literary journals, of course, sponsorized, otherwise it's not possible. And as a publisher and editor of foreign literature, especially fiction and essays, but also of poetry. I know that the books I publish, they sell well, and that means that people are interested in them. I have here just to show you. I don't know if you can see it. I am very dedicated to Fernando Pessoa whole work, and this is one of the volumes of poetry published from his literary work, and now I publish 7 volumes by Fernando Pessoa, who is one of the most fascinating poets, not only of the first part of the 20th century, but I think of all times.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much of presenting this. Let's first now listen to your own poetry before we will talk about our big examples.
Întoarcerea din exil. 11 ani, 4 luni și 17 zile. A fost un exil scurt? Acesta nu este carnetul de atunci. Am avut o mulțime. Unele mari, broșate, în coperte aurite, altele mici, ușoare, cu foiță de Biblie. Noaptea le pipăiam pe furiș, le mângâiam paginile ca niște membrane, din ce în ce mai repede, mai intens, cu o dorință de nesatisfăcut. Ziua nu îndrăzneam să mă apropii de ele, de parcă era o proprietate străină. După un timp, le-am împărțit prietenilor. Pentru noul tău volum de poezie, le spuneam. Câtorva, așa pretindeau, le-au purtat noroc. Și ai venit tu, după 11 ani, 4 luni și 17 zile. Dimineața, în lumina care pare să excludă moartea, umplem fără spaimă, simplu, firesc, membrană după membrană. De câte ori întorc o pagină scrisă, Orfeu își întoarce privirea. Elegie pentru un pălărier. Tu săpai un tunel în zăpadă. De undeva se auzea ticăitul precis al unei inimi minuscule. Te-ai înhămat la o sanie, iar din uterul mamei am alunecat în uterul proaspăt săpat. Zăpada cu mine în burtă ca un pinguin însângerat. 24 de ani m-ai învăluit într-un halou invizibil. 24 de ani am trăit între bandaje. Dar rana nu exista. Ea a înflorit, perfidă și devastatoare, fără putință de scăpare, cu mult mai târziu, când haloul acela subțire s-a întors înspre tine, pânză albită de casă, așternut-o peste zâmbetul tău. Când grifonul cu gheare de fier înfura nopțile, te prindeau zorii, răstignit de un scaun, cu mâna mea, fluture alb în mâna ta, frunză îngălbenită, cu nervuri roșietice ca niște felinare. Grifonul se transforma în pasărea cu cele mai frumoase culori, pasărea paradisului, după cum mi-ai arătat atunci într-o carte. Și mâna ta mi-era așa caldă și bună, de parcă lângă mine dormea, Doamne, Doamne. Ai fost un pălărier destoinic. Ai avut grijă ca pălăria mea roșie să fie fierbinte, ca albul să nu se acopere de niciun fir de praf, ca verdele să-și păstreze intactă clorofila. Îți creștea inima când vedeai puritatea acestor culori și pentru că tot timpul credeai că temperatura nu-mi este prielnică, m-ai învăluit în halou acela subțire, care era puterea ta. Ar fi trebuit să te ascult când păianjen uriaș, țintuit între tuburi de oxigen, strigai, acuș, acuș o să zbor. Ar fi trebuit să-ți deschid larg fereastra și tu să ții într-adevăr zborul, până deveneai un deget luminos la o mână de cer. Rana atunci a înflorit, perfidă și devastatoare, fără putință de salvare. Halou acela subțire, tunel săpat de tine în zăpadă, pasărea paradisului, marsupiu bărbătesc, s-a desprins de pe mine, ca și cum n-ar fi fost, și s-a întors înspre tine. Pânza albită de casă, așternută peste zâmbetul tău. Respirație recuperatorie. Mâna mea dreaptă e o țeavă și ochiul meu drept și gura, ruginită țeavă dimineața, când cu două degete încerc să o albesc, iar o travă de colțul ierbii în ea. Astă vară în mare, glesna ta era o țeavă fierbinte. Cu câtă disperare i-am atins fluierul delicat. Cordon umbilical între mine și lume, glesna ta, magnetică țeavă, ținându-mă încă în viață. Și acum mai străbat adâncuri ca o undă lăsată de ea, și acum mai respir doar prin ea.
I think actually it's so wonderful to have you all in your intimate rooms. It's even maybe better than having you on stage in Brussels. To have you in your intimacy in all the rooms in the countries, in the cities, countrysides where you live. And I would like to make a little tour now. Denise already told us about the importance of Fernando Pessoa for her, a writer that she has published, a poet. And I would like to know more about your great examples of poets. Who is your great example? And from some of you I know already. So let's start with Sigurd Björk.
Oh, that's a difficult one.
You said Simon Armitage before. No?
Sorry?
You said Simon Armitage before.
Ah, did I? Oh, yes. Well, maybe that's... Okay, that makes sense. Because I was translating his poetry last year. Yes, so that must have been why I said that. Yeah, maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's what you're working on at the exact time you were asked, or what you're reading when you were asked. Maybe that is the answer. So maybe, yeah, I mean, normally I say Ungaretti if I'm asked, because I think I was struck by, when I was reading it many years ago, I thought it was amazing that someone actually taking part in a World War battlefield would be able to write poetry, maybe even at the same time, and such concise poetry that says a lot. But so that was my answer maybe 15 years ago. So okay, let's go with Armitage then today.
Well, yes, that's interesting. We'll come back to the relation between big examples and translating, because most of you are also translators of poetry. So we'll come back to that. But first, I would like to know from Giedre, you talked before about Szymborska, the Polish the great Polish poets.
Yes, I really loved Szymborska, but I think I'm a very conservative poet. I love old poets, Szymborska, Tsvetaeva, Akhmatova. It's not contemporary poetry, but I admire some lesbian poets, for example, Adrienne Rich, but really I don't think there are my authorities because I want to be myself. I want to write by myself. I want to have my own style and so on. But I tried to translate some poems in my life from various languages, but I'm not I don't keep myself translator because I'm afraid of mistakes. I have a fear to translate. I don't know one language very well. Even my Lithuanian I don't know very well. So translation is not my job.
Yes, yes, because you really are a language purist. You're really focused on language a lot. Caroline, what would your favorite poet, your big example be?
I have a lot actually, but I think the one that I read the most is probably Jacques Izoard. It's a Belgian poet from Liège. I also have Jean Cocteau and more older ones like Paul Éluard, who really struck me when I was a teenager, because they talk about bodies, they talk about nature and how it interacts with the bodies, and I think it's so fascinating. And also with Jacques Izoard, he has this thing with language where he associates the different senses, and I really like that. I think it's he's a big example for me.
Thank you very much. Katja.
Yes. I have to tell my examples.
Yes. Which poet your favorite?
I have to say that I'm very much influenced by the countries that are our neighbors, like contemporary Croatian poetry, Serbian poetry, and also Austrian. Maybe one example from Serbia, I really like one. I was really influenced also by one playwright and also poet, Milena Markovic. And also from Croatia, like Monica Herceg. These are all mostly feminist poets and playwrights. And also from Afro-American poets, Ntozake Shange, and from Austrian, Elfriede Jelinek. I think I was mostly influenced by her, but not to steal her voice or to write in her kind of way, but just by her ironic and direct kind of writing. I felt like home when I was reading her playwrights and dramas and so on.
Thank you. That's just wonderful. Feel at home in someone's language. We listen to Marlena, and then after Marlena, I will ask you another question, which interests me. Marlena, who is your favorite poet, or which poet influenced you?
I started with the surrealist poets when I was very young. Of course, the classical poetry, of course, Paul Éluard, Aragon, Desnos, et Antonin Artaud, que je trouve vraiment très important pour la littérature française, non seulement française. Fernando Pessoa, Borges. Et dans la littérature moderne, la littérature contemporaine, et à travers, through the translation, I'm sorry, I'm passing from one language to another. Through the translation, I could know very well, understand differently the modern poets. French poets, Romanian poets, Israeli poets. So this is the role of translation, in fact, understanding from a different point of view, the poetry. Michel de Guy, Jean-Michel Morpois, Guy Goffet.
Poets, men, poets. Thank
And the Belgian poets like Christian Hubin, Eric Brognier.
Thank you very much. There was one question, listening to Gedre and Katja saying lesbian poets, feminist poets. So I was wondering, since we have 6 female voices here around the table, does poetry have a gender? Caroline.
I think I will leave the others. I will let the others talk because they have more experience than I do, but I can add something at the end.
Okay. Yeah.
I believe poetry could have a gender because many female poets may write about very special experiences, about giving birth, about abortion, about experiences which they know very well. And I know that we could say that poetry has no gender, but I think gender is a beautiful thing, and it may be in poetry, and I'm not afraid of this. For me, it's important, quite important, because I love all poetry. I'm interested in many forms, in many genres, but I'm interested in that poetry which is actual for me. It acts for me, speaks for me.
Wonderful. Marlena, what do you think about it?
I think poetry has no gender, because language has no gender, or not a fixed gender. It is very different from one language to another. For instance, you see flower, it may be masculine in one language and feminine in another language. The moon may be feminine and may be masculine, or even no gender. The sun, the sea may be masculine, may be feminine. So no gender in the language. And from another viewpoint, in fact, when you talk, Gerdre, about emotions, you put in your poetry, emotions are, of course, they are in the poetry, but everybody has emotions, different kind of emotions, but everybody is not a poet. So a poem is not just an emotion, but the way you change, you transform the emotions through the language. So you work into the language a kind of metamorphosis from yourself, from your own emotions to a poem, and the reader, in fact, the person who reads a poem has to decompose the symbols and the poem and reconstruct his own emotions. This is the dynamics of poetry.
Thank you very much for this answer. Maybe it would be nice to hear one more voice about this question. Is there someone who would like to answer it for herself?
Yes, you skipped me.
Okay.
So what I want to say is that here is a double perspective, and all of my fellow poets pointed it out. From the perspective of the poet, and so beautifully said it Ingeborg Bachmann, one of my favorite poets, that writing poetry is the toughest thing in the world. Why? Because on the run, you have to follow at the same time form, themes, and vocabulary. And I think that from the point of view of themes, of subjects, let's say, the poetry is, how Giedre said, masculine, male, or female. But from the point of view of the emotion it creates, I think that poetry is a kind of epiphany. It creates moments of beatitude. From this point of view, poetry has no sex.
Thank you very much. You were saying difficult thing about this to write poetry. I can really believe it. What is for you the future of poetry? Is there a place for poetry in this world, or do you feel in the several generations you're from that poetry is getting marginalized, or is there a new way of bringing to the forefront poetry today? Maybe this is one for Caroline to start with.
Yes, I think it's also important because people from my age, like in their 20s, often don't really appreciate poetry, and a way in which they get some kind of connection with it is poetry slam, or as mentioned before, you have like writing clubs, poetry clubs, and I think it's important to underline that it's not exclusive. In fact, it's inclusive, so everyone is welcome, whatever they want to talk about and whatever form it may take. And yes, I hope younger people will get more interest in the future, and I think poetry slam really helps it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, and so in this view, I can imagine that also crossing the borders with poetry, being translated, being invited through Versopolis, for example, to other festivals in other countries, is really very, very important to create, to maintain this community. The importance of poetry in the world and in the society. So yes, Katja, maybe how do you see this importance of the poetic context in the world?
Yes, I have to say that since when I published my first book, that was 10 years ago, and I started to connect with the platform Versopolis, I got a lot of chances to travel abroad and also to meet other contemporary poets and to get my first translations. And for me, it was like beautiful to see my poems being translated, because for me it was like the day that the poems, like, they found a home in another language, even if I don't understand the language, and I found it some kind of magic. And also, yes, the most important for me was to connect with other poets from other countries and to share my experience with their experience, and to see how poetry scene is going all over the world, not only in our small Slovenia.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Sigurd Björk, you live in Iceland. Are you also traveling with your poetry? Are you being translated? Are you translating yourself?
I don't translate my own work, no. But I think translators are absolutely vital and wonderful. They, for example, when you write in a language that is spoken by a few 100,000 people, or even in a bigger language, you you have a broader audience, and it's like a ticket to enter. It's like a train ticket to enter new realms. And so I'm both like far away and also confined with how do you say, natural border. There's no, it's an island, so there is no immediate neighbor. So it's somehow the translations are building this connection to other places. And yes, I have traveled quite a lot, mostly in Europe, but also to other places with the readings, and just having a reaction from, I don't know, a Colombian audience or a Croatian audience is absolutely fantastic. And Versopolis and other platforms, they give you personal connections that is, well, it's friendship. It goes beyond the writing process. It's I have very good friends in different countries, and it's all thanks to readings and meetings. Just like you said before we went on air, we have now met each other twice while preparing this, and already it's like we know each other, because if you meet once it's nice, but twice already is like, you know, connection. So third time we meet, we are you know, we're good.
Third time we'll be live in Brussels. Marlena, how is it for you not to be able to travel these times? Do you?
No, I'm thinking about traveling and about festivals, and I just wanted to say that in poetry festivals in France or in Belgium or in Canada, poetry was combined with music or with painting, because painters were invited and actors were invited. And a very special event was in France, in a poetry festival a few years ago, when I was reading a few poems, and at the same time, a violinist was improvising some music. She was listening a few words, a few lines of my poems, and she started playing according to what she felt about. And painters also work with poets, and this is a kind of dialogue. It is not just illustrating poems, not at all, but a dialogue, a dynamic dialogue between the painter and the poet.
Okay.
So poetry should become a very living art. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Also, the video art is very important.
Well, what I now remember from the things we have discussed today is the relation between other art forms, the relation between poetry and society we live in, and the urgency also to express ourselves in a poetical way about the world we live in, and also the crossing of the borders, the language borders, the borders of the countries, of the regions, just to feel that we are part of a broader context as poets and can exchange. So this has been a very good and interesting way, I think, do it. TRANSPOESIE has been working on all these aims for 10 years already in this multilingual city, which is Brussels. It is wonderful that we've been able now to get a little bit more with universes of view. And at the same time, it is great that in the coming 4 Wednesdays, every time we will be able to meet other poets who are invited by the TRANSPOESIE. We are reaching now the time that we have to close session, which is really a pity because I feel that we go on for a long time to discuss many things. And I hope we'll do in the future, Brussels or anywhere else. So thank you very much, six of you, to firstly to make these great presentations and videos of the you have been reading for us. Secondly, to be present with us online tonight. And I'm sure we have had some hundreds and thousands of listeners. And since this project will stay online also in the coming weeks and months, we'll reach more people still. So thank you very much to you all. Thank you very much to the audience being present in the Hungarian Institute. Thank you very much, UNIC and TRANSPOESIE and the platform of Versopolis. And see you next Wednesday for the other TRANSPOESIE event.